Hello, this is Cale Weston. I spoke to three friends, three good friends, three veterans from three different generations who fought in three different wars. I asked them what Memorial Day means to them.
Memorial Day.
Someone once asked me what Memorial Day means to me. It represented soldiers who died for the principle that we accept as the freedom of choice.
My name is Kim Adamson, and what does Memorial Day mean to me? Memorial Day is one, a day of remembrance for those that have gone before us, and this is in terms of gone before on a battlefield. And I feel like I've had a real close and intimate relationship with our dead as an officer in charge of a mortuary affairs unit with the Marine Corps during 3 of my 4 combat tours to Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a very humbling time, and I find that when Memorial Day rolls around, I think about all those young men and women that were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan and that I had personal contact with.
Well, I'm John Zaccheo, and I'm 93 years old.
I'm Ty Chrysostom, and I am 32. I was Marine Corps from 2006 to 2010, a rifleman.
Well, in the Philippines, you have to recognize this small island was not like Europe where tanks were all over and so forth. In the Philippines, you had a lot of coral rock, and it was very difficult to climb up. And the Japanese had a cadre of about 300 people up in the top highest hill in Calico. And they used to come down almost every night and raid our supply depot. Never could catch them. They were very sneaky. But everyone there said the day will come, and it did. We finally caught them.
My first deployment was to Iraq in 2004 and part of 2005, and I was with a civil affairs unit there, and then I did 3 more tours, one in 2009, 2010. That was my first one as a mortuary affairs officer in Iraq, and then again in 2010, the last half of 2010, in Afghanistan, and then again in 2012 in Afghanistan.
The first deployment was from 07 to 08. We went on the 11th MEU and sailed from San Diego, California, across the Pacific to a number of different stops. The Marine Corps goes on these kinds of deployments from time to time as a contingency force that's supposed to be available anywhere around the world on a rotating basis. So it was not a combat deployment, but that wouldn't happen until the next deployment, which was to Afghanistan in 2009 for Operation Kanjar.
Well, when you look at the time and the period, and your uncles and your cousins, and everybody wanted to stop Hitler. Everybody knew that the destruction of what happened in Europe was all caused by Hitler. So we had an enemy we identified, a principle we identified. So it was never any question of what might happen to us. It was just that we had a cause, we had a desire, and as foolish as it might seem, I never found anyone that was scared to go in. Everybody volunteered, everybody felt this is the America we're fighting for, and they accepted it.
When I arrived in Fallujah, I was 49 years old, and I turned 50 years old in Fallujah. I don't think there's any job better than to be in service to one's country. And it's because of the service that our young men and women partake when they join the military. It just ensures that our freedoms can still be enjoyed by all of us here in the United States, because freedom isn't free.
Well, it's maybe a little bit to be a member of a Marine Corps rifle squad, and every Marine knows this coming out of boot camp, but the mission of the Marine Corps rifle squad is to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy by fire and maneuver. Well, it was very hot and dusty at first. It was barren. The operation began, and although there was some sporadic resistance that we encountered within the first days of the push, it did change, and things got worse the closer we got to the national elections.
Fallujah was a real hot spot. It was very dangerous. We made weekly treks into the city, and it really wasn't safe. You didn't know if your vehicle would be hit by an IED or a sniper or anything like that. It was dangerous. It was really dangerous. And there weren't a lot of women in the war zone there. And the rumor around the camp was that the enemy was looking to snag either a major or lieutenant colonel, and definitely wanted a female soldier.
Well, there's no question in World War II we had to defeat Hitler, and because of the Battle of Midway, we were able to destroy 5 Japanese carriers. We lost a couple of our own ships, but that battle changed the fight about the Japanese when we invaded Normandy, and I had a cousin who was in the first wave to hit the beach, and I can't even describe some of the horror he's seen. But we had to do it. There was no other force on earth. And so for all of us, it was just, when will we end it all?
My understanding of this was to conduct a counterinsurgency campaign so that the people in Afghanistan could make this self-determination as to what kind of government they would have, and ensure that transition into it would happen peacefully. Perhaps one of the real failures in a political sense, in a larger strategic sense, was that the benchmarks for knowing what that might look like were not really clearly defined. By the way, this is an unresolved situation. It's still ongoing, and these wars have not concluded.
As a country, we need to support our military, not hold them at fault, these young men and women that are going and fighting for our country's ideals. We just need to respect our veterans and our active duty service members, and at the end of their duty, that we take care of them, because we owe them so much.
A lot of them are working government jobs. Some of them have fallen away from contact completely. There's been a handful of suicides, freak deaths, convictions to prison that I've heard about.
I mean, a lot of these kids, they've never seen a dead person before, except maybe grandma at a funeral. But to be like so involved with them, it affected some of their psyche. I think there have been at least one suicide that I'm aware of, and it was just tough on them. A lot of alcoholism when they came back, and other addictions. It's a tough job, because you're taking care of someone who dresses like you, who's in your age group, and it just shows you how fragile life is, especially in a combat zone.
It was kind of a little bit like paintball, except that you end up coming to the shocking realization that bullets do a bit more damage than paintballs.
War is not productive, it's destructive. And in my opinion, anything that's destructive doesn't accomplish anything, no matter how well or how many victory flags you put up. Those lives are lost. We have to find better ways to solve our problem. It brings up the question, Why would a soldier say to himself, I may die and not come back, and why is it important for me to give up my life? And when you look back at what we have in this country and what it takes to live the daily lives we live, and you recognize that they did this for the principle of freedom of choice and freedom for everyone. So there was a principle here. There was a value system that we preserved.
I would say here you kind of have that, congratulatory, thank you for your service or whatever. The public perception, I think, has changed somewhat given the conflicts that the U.S. has been more recently involved in. So I think it's certainly within the responsibility of a government when they send people to war and they come back not necessarily whole or intact, that there are resources made available, there's effort put into ameliorating those situations to the greatest extent possible. On the one hand, it's kind of just the job I did for a while, but on another, it's a lot of stuff that happens. That, and I get jammed up every time I get asked that question, because it's just like, how do I convey 8 months of a combat deployment into what's going to end up being a very reductive answer?
It's really a time to remember those men and women who went before us. It's not about me. It's about them. It's about those who paid that ultimate sacrifice with their life. And though we talk about it being from the battlefield, sometimes that battlefield is brought home. So I think it would encompass and include those that had dealings with their own personal trauma or PTSD and maybe took their own life. I include those in Memorial Day as well.
I agree with Ty. We have to start someplace. If it's the day we celebrate not only the past, not only the many soldiers that passed away, not only the lives that mattered to families and mothers and children, then we've got to do something. We can't continue to accept the status quo and expect that we're going to be a better nation. No, my hope is high, my belief is high, and my energy is high. I'm going to do what I can to make a change.
That's right, and I think it would be mostly true to say that what Memorial Day is supposed to symbolically represent is not always necessarily practiced by most of the people in the country, right? It's a long weekend.
Well, when I went over to Europe and went to Normandy, as I walked the beach, and somebody came up to me, a Frenchman, and said, "Americana?" I said, "Yeah." "WW2?" I said, "Yeah." He reached his hand out, shook me, gave me a big hug and a kiss on each cheek. I stood there and said, what an impression we must have left then to what we have today. It's shocking.
Well, I'm going to have a silent reflection. I'll probably look through my notes of the Marines and soldiers and airmen and sailors that we took care of in our mortuary affairs collection points, because I've had this one dream that I want to travel to where the Marines that I and my Marines took care of. I would like to travel to those cemeteries and leave a challenge coin there and a note of thanks. And it seems to be the only way I can have my final closure. I love this country and no regrets.
One thing that came to mind when I started to think of this is Jane Austen said, perspective is the way in which we consider others and are willing to help our neighbor. And when that goes out the windows, the gates of hell are open, and ignorance is king. This was said 100 years ago. And here we are today, as a strong memory that still applies today. And this is what Memorial Day means to me. Thank you.
Memorial Day is more than a long weekend. It's a time, I think, of reflection and making sure that future policy matches future sacrifice for our troops and their families.